Hello and welcome. This is Rusty Gaylord, and we are live here for Fork in the Road. Fork in the Road is a conversation with people about how they got to where they are today in life, right? All of our lives are guided by the decisions we make, the small ones and the big ones. And oftentimes we don't know when we're making those decisions exactly where they're going to lead us. Of course, we have our best intentions, but it's helpful to take a look backwards in life and see how we got there. So today I'm happy to have Alain Hunkins on the line with us, and we're going to bring him on in just a moment. Alain is a coach and a trainer and has worked with many of the top Fortune 100 companies around the world, helping in leadership development. And I love his mission, which is about kindling the fire of brilliance in people. So we're gonna talk a little bit more about that. But let me just bring Alain on, and we'll get started. Welcome, Alain.
Thank you, Rusty. It's my pleasure to be with you today. I'm really excited for our conversation.
Excellent. Well, me too. So I just shared a little bit of your mission about kindling the fire of brilliance in people, and I'm curious where that came from. Like, what inspired that in you, and where in your life journey did that become something of prominence that you wanted to focus on?
Yeah, well, interesting. I think it's such a good place to start because, I coach a lot of people. And, one of the things we early days we get into is recognizing, like, am I doing the things that actually matter to me? Right. And so we oftentimes go back and do a little values clarity because unfortunately, it seems like a lot of people are doing a lot of climbing up that ladder of success. And, the question becomes, are you climbing on the right wall when you get there? And so it's so often, and I see it, oftentimes mid-career professionals call it the hole in the soul, right? We get there like, is this it? Is that all there is? So I was really lucky for whatever reason. And I know you and I were talking off camera just before we started that we share this similar experience in something called the Mankind Project, a not-for-profit that helps basically empower men to missions of service for themselves, their families, and their communities. So when I was actually 24, I was in graduate school. I was going through an MFA program, getting a degree in acting. I was actually at an acting conservatory. And one of my classmates named John went through this training in our first of 3 years. And I went, that sounds good, John. He said, you should try this. It's a training for men. I said, it's good. But I was, a broke graduate student. He's like, it's $500. Like, there's no way I'm spending that kind of money at this point in my life. And the amazing thing was, Rusty, is watching John change over the next 2 years. There was something about him, a certain sense of groundedness, a sense of his ability to clearly articulate what he wanted, what he needed, setting some boundaries. It was a pretty funky graduate environment that we were in, very high stress, high pressure. And something by the third year, I thought, I want whatever John's doing. I need to do some of this. So long story short, I go on this training weekend called the New Warrior Training Adventure. And in that weekend process, there is something where an exercise to really cultivate one's own personal mission. And I love the equation. It's really quite simple. It's the sense of what is your vision, right? So for me, my vision was creating this vibrant and alive world. And then what is the action that you see yourself doing to bring this vision to life? And for me, it was around kindling the fire of brilliance in people. And what's so interesting is that those words came out pretty full born in November of 1994. And I've stuck with that pretty much ever since. So, and I think for me, what's interesting is if you think about kindling the fire of brilliance is a metaphor, right? I don't actually go over to you and start like putting sparks on you, right? Like, here,
I
let's
hope
light you up.
not.
Hope not, right? But so interesting for me because I am an ideas person. I always have been. I live very much in the world of ideas, which is why I write. Now I speak. And so for me, it's trying to find the right ideas for the right person and to bring them to life. And another thing I do is I tell stories, and I realize how powerful our stories are. And something that I certainly didn't realize when I was 26 was that I had a story. And you have a story, Rusty, and all of us have not just one story, but multiple stories to show who we are. Like you were saying, the decisions that we have made that have brought us to the place that we are today. And what decisions are we going to make today that are going to bring us to the place that we want to be tomorrow? So long answer to your question about how I ended up with this mission of creating a vibrant and alive world by kindling the fire of brilliance in people.
Yeah. Well, I love it. And I'm curious about something, which is I also have been a part of that new warrior training adventure. And it was a marvelous, intense weekend experience. It felt transformative for me. And yet, I know how easy it is to leave there, to go back to your life and get absorbed back into your life, just the way it's
Yeah,
been.
yeah,
And I'm curious for you, you came up with this vision in many ways came to you fully formed. I'm curious, was it a challenge for you to actually live into that, to start to shape your life around it? Because it would be easy to say, hey, this is inspirational and exciting, but to put it on the sideline and to go about doing what you were doing.
yeah. Well, I think I had the good fortune is that so much of my life was still quite malleable and in flux in those
Mm.
years, right? So I'm 26, so I finished the training. The next May, I graduate from my grad school program. I head back to New York with my girlfriend, and I started. I went into acting, but I started doing a lot of teaching. The other thing was I was so keen on the transformative experience I had on the weekend, this initial weekend. I said, I want to do more of that. So I started um, volunteering as a junior facilitator for these ongoing integration groups that would happen every week. And as luck would have it, so I'm there with a senior facilitator. And after 2 weeks, the senior facilitator basically quits and it leaves me, 26-and-a-half-year-old Alain, like, hold on a second, guys. Let me look to the next page in the book and see what's coming here. And so I just was flying by the seat of my pants and I was doing the stuff that was meaningful to me. And I kept following that and staying involved with people that inspired me and reading a ton. I really got interested in reading and learning more about personal and professional development at that time. And that's what led me to applying to a bunch of jobs. And then I ended up in 97, which is, a few years later, I ended up getting a job in the corporate training world, basically facilitating experiential leadership and management programs for companies. I'd never worked in businesses before. And suddenly I realized I had a voice and so in some ways that early mission forming imprinting process gave me this license to go and find my direction. And so that's why I feel really lucky to have found this way that I get to do what I do and be so happy about it.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. I'm curious about the integration of these pieces of work. I know, having spent 25 years of my life in the corporate world, at big corporations, I worked at General Electric, I worked at Apple. There's very much a sense that there's a corporate mentality or a corporate persona, right? That a
Mhm.
lot of people believe this is how you need to show up at work.
Mm.
You
Yeah.
need to be professional. You leave the personal things aside. Just you're not too emotional, right? We've all heard those. And
Mhm.
yet here you are talking about something that is deeply personal and
Mhm.
mission driven. And it sounds like that's a part of your work now that you do with business leaders. And I'm
Yeah.
curious, if you rewind back to the first times you started to integrate those things, I'm curious what was going through your head as you were
Sure.
saying, can I actually bring some of this powerful personal work into the business world?
Yeah. Yeah. Such a good question, Rusty. Such a good question. It's been a journey of
Mm.
part of it. I think this is a journey, not just mine, but is fairly archetypal that many of us experience, is that over the years, I have learned to become more comfortable with myself. Another way to say that is I care less about what other people think about me, right? And I think this is what so many of us, when people say like, well, look, you've got to be corporate. I mean, what does that really mean? If we stop, like, because how do you be corporate? Does that mean like you said, check your feelings at the door, like don't speak up, like dress in a certain way, cut your hair? I mean, yeah, there's certain trappings of that, but for the most part a lot of corporate stuff means just go sit through a lot of really boring meetings is what I see, and just not, and that when someone who's higher up than you in the hierarchy says something, you don't question it because that's and to me, that's kind of a soul killing exercise, right? And so
Mhm.
one of the things that I started doing early on, I was interested in, for example, Daniel Goleman's work in emotional intelligence, which has been around for a while, is I'd start bringing in the data, the research, the science, the neuroscience into this stuff and bring this into the conversation because I felt like it wasn't enough for me just to know this, in my heart and to write it on a cocktail napkin, but actually like, look, there's science behind what we're talking about here. And so I would bring that in for all the cynic left brain people who didn't trust this. I started that from that perspective. But what I have found that over the years since then, I mean, 94 to 21, 25, 26 years now, is that the the norms have shifted for sure in the workplace. I mean, now the majority of our workforce is Gen Y and Gen Z, and they are hungry for a different type of leader. They are not looking for people to be that old straight. They want to bring their whole selves to work, very much so. Whereas, I'm a Gen Xer, is very much they expected to, like, keep your head down, keep your nose clean, do as you're told. But that's not the world that we live in anymore. And I think good,
Mhm.
good, good. So for me, it's been this journey of evolution of learning to step into stuff. And also earlier on, I was working as an employee for a training company. And now, I have my own company. I have my own book. I have my own thought leadership brand out there. And I also realized I don't need to be everyone's cup of tea. I couldn't take on the entire world of 7 billion people as a client, even if I wanted to. So as long
Right.
as what I have to say resonates for enough people, it's good enough for me.
Mhm. Mhm. Um, well, you have the good fortune of having found your path very early in life.
Yeah.
And some of the people that I work with, and I imagine that you run into people like this as well, right? Asking these questions later in life, right?
Yeah.
Once they've established themselves, they're partway down the path of life, and they've started to build a career, they have some credibility, some success, they're known, and then they're questioning, asking some of these questions. I'm curious, what do you tell someone who finds himself in that kind of place of, hey, I'm mid 30s or 40 or mid 40s, and I've discovered, asking myself, is this really where I want to spend the rest of my life?
Yeah.
It's a bit of a scarier proposition for someone in that place in life to
Yeah.
be questioning all of those things. So I'm curious, what would you say to someone in that place?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I usually start off by giving him a huge round of applause. Like, the fact that you're questioning is awesome because, so many people get into that situation and they're afraid, like, this, like, you realize how many people are there and they won't even let themselves ask the question of themselves, or certainly not with someone like me. So the fact that you're here today, I want to celebrate that. I want to celebrate the fact that you're willing to take a risk that, there's a reason cultural norms exist. It's to keep us stuck. And I'll just be real personal for a second. My father died last year in June of this year, 2021, of Parkinson's. And,
Mm,
for those that have lost a parent, it is another ritual. It is a rite of passage. And it struck me how much, like, when you are on your deathbed, and my father and I looked very much alike. People would get us confused on the phone constantly. So he
mm,
was definitely sitting there, literally in his deathbed, seeing his face reflecting back at me. I couldn't help but imagine myself in his seat.
mhm,
And so I share all that because so many people that I know, either themselves, their parents, or people they know, get there and they wait. And so for me, it goes back to, if I'm having this conversation with someone, well, great, you're scared. Congratulations. Fear, that means that
mhm,
you're not in the right place. And so before you jump, let's take a little time and clarify, what is it you think you want? And let's not get like, I want to work for this company, and like, time out. What are the big overarching values, right? And then how can you start to lean into those values, as opposed to, because I'm not a big believer in, like, some people are like, if that's important, like, quit your job, leave all this. Like, you know what? I had that thought about leaving the training company I was working with, but, I had two small kids at home, and I had, health insurance, and, like, I get
mhm,
it. So, but in this world today, there are ways for you to start exploring your passions as side hustles, to start to see where things go, and spending time where and when, everyone will say, like, I don't have time. I'm like, look, if there's so many people who can do stuff. It's a question of priorities. What are you
mhm,
willing to let go of? And so the question becomes, like, what's at risk? And so often what we realize is the rules that we've had in our heads about, I can't because this is the rule. These aren't rules, they're beliefs. They're beliefs that we have adopted as rules. So what are you willing to give up? And I can guarantee you that, like, the kids want more of your time, your presence, than they want your stuff. Those presents, right? They don't, it's like, oh, but we've got this big house and this mortgage and these three cars. And, like, what do you really need? What's going to make you happy? And are you willing to maybe take some short term sacrifice for longer term? And that's investing in yourself, a longer term goal.
mm.
That's the risk. And I think in some ways that is the risk of being authentic to oneself in the world. And look, and I
Yeah.
get it. I get there might be other extenuating circumstances. And, I'm a big believer in, I'm sure you're familiar with that model. I think Stephen Covey made it famous, the whole circle of influence versus circle of concern. It's like, what
Hmm.
can you do? I know there's a lot of things you can't do, but focusing on the things that you can do and start there.
Hmm. Yeah. I'm curious if you rewind back in your life. I mean, you had working at this training company, and at some point
Yeah.
you started off and created your own business. And
Mhm.
now, as you said, right, you're a thought leader. You have your own book. You've got a whole robust business around that.
Yeah.
But it doesn't start that way,
No.
right? Everybody starts at the beginning. And I'm curious for you, as you were making that journey, as you were making
Yeah.
that step,
Yeah.
and you just described for a period of time you chose not to because there were, you had young children, health insurance, all of that. So
Yeah.
I'm curious, what were some of the factors for you as you were making that step, and um, how you mustered up or not mustered up the courage, but really found that this was the right step for you at the right time.
Yeah, and I like to say I've been on the slow track to success. I've definitely, I mean, people, my book came out in 2020. People said, you could have written this book 10 years ago. I'm like, yeah, I could have, but I wasn't ready. In that I was focused on, I had a job, I had small kids. My parents divorced when I was one. And one of the
Hmm.
stories I told myself was, I am not going to be that family. That was very important that I was going to show up and provide for my kids and be there. And so I made some choices to, choose family and stuff over professional aspirations, but I knew I got to a point where I needed to do this. I wanted to do this. And so for me, it came down to a question of how am I filling my free time? So I said, I'm going to start writing. I hired a writing coach, and they were, I tell you, and I was paying him a monthly retainer. And there was something about, writing that check every month and putting it in the mail that was going to be, I'm not going to write this guy a check and not do any work. So it was incentive for me to get on the horse about this. And he helped me to work through a book proposal and get it out to agents and get a publisher. And we had a couple of false starts and a lot of things, but it's not easy. It never is easy. And I think you've got to have something in you that's going to make you want to get up and go when no one else will either know if you do or you don't. And you may not get any feedback on this for a long time. So, what can you do in the meantime to keep you going? And this is where I think having a circle of friends, network, community support, whatever you want to call it, where you can share what's going on and have people be in your court, in your corner, and be your allies and support you to keep going. Because otherwise, it's a hard road to do already, but doing it completely alone is even harder. And
Hmm.
I think this is one of the myths of our culture is that we think that all these self-made people have done it individually, and I don't think anything can be further from the truth. So reach out and ask
Hmm.
for some support for sure.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you that was part of my, just, share a little bit of my personal experience. Was up until the point when I got divorced, I thought that I was supposed to do it all alone. And I just realized in that experience, at some point, I was brought to the place where I figured I cannot do this by myself anymore.
Yeah.
So that value of building the people around you to help you navigate difficult times, to help you see opportunities, and just really to be part of the journey. We are biologically social beings, and
Yeah.
we thrive based on the social relationship. So, tying back to that point you made earlier, is even for people who are skeptical of being their whole self at work, um, there's some biological basis to that we connect better with people when we are ourselves, and we are wired to connect with people. That is one of the ways we create value, and it creates an engaged workforce. So there's a lot of benefits to it that if you take the time to acknowledge it.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Well, Alain, we're close to wrapping up. A couple of questions for you here as we're moving towards the end. One is there for someone who's in a leadership position, who is a successful business leader, who has been one of those people who said, well, I've got to suit up and show up and do my best at work, and I'm putting my all into that, which means other things are lower priority in their life. How do you invite someone like that to begin this process of introspection or questioning if that's something they want to continue?
Yeah. Well, I think the operative words are if that's something they want to continue. One of the
Mhm.
old rules of coaching is you can only coach people who are coachable. So, look,
Yeah.
if you are doing what you're doing and it is working for you and you have no need to change, don't listen to me. Don't waste your time. Do what you're doing. That's fine. Who am I to say? It's assuming you're not breaking any laws, go for it. Um, so, however, if you kind of feel like there's something missing, I think it's worth, first of all, taking a little inventory, whether it's some kind of an assessment, some feedback tools, whatever it is, working with someone who can help you to get a clear snapshot on where you are. And if there's pieces that are missing, to notice that. And that's the first step. And then just like
Mhm.
sit with that for a moment. One of my mentors always says, you can't change what you don't notice. Right. So awareness is the first step, self-awareness, particularly. And then once you have that, then you can work with someone else to look at what are maybe potentially some of the limiting beliefs that are getting in your way. And then what are some things you can do to clarify what might be some potential ideas to implement and take action on. Because ultimately, if you want to be someone different, you're going to need to do something different. So, but
Mhm.
you don't jump to the action step, and I think too many people in this world are high implementers, like, got to get it done now. It's like, no, time out. Let's make sure we're clarifying what the actual issue is and see if this action is going to get you there. And then, like I said before, getting feedback and support will be critical on your road to success in that way.
Well, for those people who have listened and want that kind of feedback and support from you, what would be a good way to connect with you?
Yeah, sure. So easiest place to find me is my website, alainhunkins.com, ALAINHUNKINS.com. I do one-on-one coaching with leaders, also do group coaching as well as leadership training for teams and organizations. So check out the website. If you have any questions, connect with me on LinkedIn if you'd like. Also, if you have any other questions, you can reach me at alain@alainhunkins.com. I do answer all emails there, and you can learn more about the kind of work that I do. And hopefully this gives you a little flavor of what that work might be looking like.
Yes. Well, Alain, thank you so much for joining today and sharing a little bit of your personal story as well. I know that's meaningful because a lot of people, as you said, it's easy to look at someone who's reached a degree of success and say, "Well, how did they get there?" But sharing a little bit of the slow journey that you took to get there.
Sure.
So, thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure, Rusty. Thank you so much.